In a small, quiet town surrounded by lush green hills and thick forests, life moved at a peaceful pace. People knew each other by name, and everyone looked out for one another. It was the kind of place where neighbors shared fresh-baked pies. Kids played freely in the streets and laughter echoed through the air on sunny afternoons. This close-knit community was buzzing with excitement because today wasn't just any ordinary day. It was the day of Emily Carter's wedding. Emily was a beloved figure in the town. She worked as a school teacher, spending her days shaping young minds and filling their lives with warmth and encouragement. Her students adored her, her colleagues respected her, and the townsfolk considered her one of their own. Emily had a way of making people feel seen and valued, whether it was through her bright smile, thoughtful gestures, or genuine interest in others' lives. Everyone agreed that she deserved nothing less than happiness, which is why her upcoming marriage to Daniel Harper felt like a dream come true. Daniel was new to town, having arrived just 6 months ago. At first, he kept to himself, renting a modest apartment above the local bakery and working remotely as a freelance graphic designer. But soon enough, his charm won over the residents. He was polite, well-spoken, and always willing to lend a hand, whether it was helping Mrs. Thompson carry groceries or fixing a broken fence for Mr. Jenkins. His good looks and confident demeanor made him stand out, but it was his kindness that truly endeared him to the townspeople. When he started dating Emily, no one was surprised. The two seemed perfect together, and their relationship blossomed quickly. The couple decided to hold their wedding in the town's charming little chapel, a historic building with stained glass windows and wooden pews that creaked softly underfoot. Preparations had been underway for weeks, and the entire town pitched in to make the day special. Baskets of wildflowers decorated every corner, ribbons streamed from the rafters, and candles flickered gently on the altar. Outside, the late spring sun bathed the landscape in golden light, casting long shadows across the grassy fields. Everything about the scene screamed romance and joy. Harold Whitaker, the town's justice of the peace, was tasked with officiating the ceremony. Harold was a familiar face in the community, known for his calm demeanor, sharp mind, and unwavering sense of duty. Over the years, he had presided over countless weddings, births, and even funerals, earning a reputation as someone who could be trusted implicitly. Now in his 70s, Harold still took pride in his work, ensuring that every event he oversaw ran smoothly and meaningfully. For this wedding, he had meticulously reviewed all the paperwork ahead of time, including the marriage license, a standard practice that rarely raised any concerns. But this time was different. As Harold sat at his desk early that morning, going over the documents one last time, something caught his attention. The signature on the marriage license didn't sit right with him. It wasn't sloppy or illegible, rather it struck him as oddly inconsistent with the rest of Daniel's presentation. During their brief meeting to sign the papers, Daniel had exuded confidence, speaking clearly and signing his name with a flourish. Yet the signature on the form looked hesitant, almost forced, as if the pen had wavered slightly before committing to each letter. At first, Harold chalked it up to fatigue or perhaps a momentary lapse in concentration. After all, people signed documents every day without much thought. Still, the discrepancy gnawed at him. He studied the signature again, comparing it to other signatures he'd seen over the years. Something about it felt off. Was it the spacing between the letters? The angle of the strokes? He couldn't quite put his finger on it, but his instincts told him to pay closer attention. Shaking his head, Harold tried to push the thought aside. Maybe he was being overly cautious. After all, what reason would Daniel have to falsify anything? The man appeared genuine, and Emily clearly loved him deeply. Their whirlwind romance might have seemed fast to some, but love often worked in mysterious ways. Besides, Harold reminded himself, he wasn't a detective. He was here to unite two people in matrimony, not investigate their pasts. Despite these rationalizations, the unease lingered. Harold found himself glancing at the clock more frequently than usual, counting down the hours until the ceremony began. As guests began arriving at the chapel, chatting animatedly and taking their seats, Harold took his place at the front. The room filled with soft murmurs and the rustle of fabric as bridesmaids adjusted their dresses and groomsmen straightened their ties. Through the open doors, sunlight streamed in, illuminating the floral arrangements and casting a warm glow over the gathering. Emily entered the chapel on her father's arm, radiant in a simple yet elegant white gown. Her eyes sparkled with happiness, and her smile lit up the room. Beside her stood Daniel, tall and handsome in his tailored suit, beaming with pride. To anyone watching, they were the picture of a happy couple ready to embark on a lifetime of love and partnership. Yet Harold couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something wasn't quite right. As he prepared to begin the ceremony, his gaze drifted toward Daniel once more. There was something in the way the groom held himself, confident yet guarded, that made Harold's instincts flare again. For now, though, there was nothing concrete to act on, only a vague suspicion that refused to fade. Harold resolved to keep a watchful eye on the proceedings, determined to ensure that everything unfolded as it should. Little did he know, his vigilance would soon uncover a truth far more unsettling than he could have imagined, and that the course of Emily's life would hinge entirely on his next move. As the ceremony began, Harold Whitaker stood at the altar, his eyes scanning the room with a mixture of professionalism and quiet concern. The chapel was alive with energy. Soft whispers from the guests, the faint rustle of fabric as people shifted in their seats, and the occasional clink of jewelry against wooden pews. Emily Carter, glowing in her wedding gown, stood beside Daniel Harper, her hands clasped tightly in his. Her face was a portrait of pure joy, her cheeks flushed, pink, and her eyes glistening with unshed tears of happiness. She looked every bit the picture of a bride deeply in love. Daniel, on the other hand, appeared calm and collected, though there was an underlying tension that only someone paying close attention might notice. He smiled warmly at Emily, nodding, occasionally when she whispered something to him, but his body language betrayed subtle signs of discomfort. His fingers drummed lightly against the edge of the podium when he thought no one was looking, and his gaze darted around the room more often than seemed natural for a man about to exchange vows. To most of the guests, these small actions would have gone unnoticed, dismissed as pre-wedding nerves. But Harold, who had spent decades observing human behavior in high-stakes moments like this, couldn't ignore them. The justice of the peace cleared his throat and began the formalities, his voice steady and warm as he welcomed everyone to the ceremony. He spoke of love, commitment, and the importance of standing by one another through life's challenges. The words rolled off his tongue effortlessly, honed by years of practice. But his mind remained sharp, analyzing every movement, every word, every glance. When it came time for the couple to present their identification, a routine step required by law, Harold watched Daniel closely. Daniel reached into the inner pocket of his suit jacket and pulled out a driver's license, handing it over with a smile that seemed just a touch too rehearsed. Harold took the card and examined it carefully, his brow furrowing ever so slightly. At first glance, everything appeared normal. The photo matched Daniel's face, the name was correct, and the expiration date hadn't passed. Yet something about the document felt off. The font seemed slightly uneven, and the holographic seal didn't catch the light quite right. It was the kind of detail that most people wouldn't notice, but Harold's trained eye picked up on it immediately. "Everything, all right?" Daniel asked, his tone casual but with a hint of defensiveness. "Oh yes," Harold replied smoothly, tucking the license back into his folder. "Just making sure all the paperwork is in order." He gave Daniel a reassuring nod, but inside, his suspicions were growing stronger. What had started as a vague feeling earlier that morning was now solidifying into something more tangible. There was no denying it anymore. Something wasn't adding up. As the ceremony continued, Harold found himself glancing at Daniel repeatedly, trying to piece together what exactly was bothering him. Was it simply the irregularities in the driver's license? Or was it something deeper, something harder to define? Daniel's charm was undeniable. He had a way of putting people at ease, engaging them with easy conversation and disarming smiles. But beneath that polished exterior, Harold detected a flicker of unease. a shadow that hinted at secrets untold. Meanwhile, Emily remained blissfully unaware of the storm brewing beneath the surface. She leaned into Daniel during a brief pause in the proceedings, whispering something that made him chuckle softly. Her trust in him was absolute, her belief in their future unwavering. Watching her, Harold felt a pang of guilt. How could he disrupt such a beautiful moment based on nothing more than a hunch? And yet, how could he not act if there was even the slightest chance that something was wrong? The vows were next, and Harold called upon the couple to share their promises to each other. Emily spoke first, her voice trembling with emotion as she pledged her love and loyalty to Daniel. Her words were heartfelt, sincere, and filled with hope for the years ahead. When it was Daniel's turn, he hesitated for the briefest of moments before launching into his own vows. They were eloquent and well-rehearsed, almost too perfect, as if they had been crafted specifically to impress rather than express genuine sentiment. As he spoke, Harold noticed a bead of sweat forming on Daniel's temple, despite the cool breeze drifting through the open windows. The guests listened intently, moved by the couple's declarations of love. A few dabbed at their eyes with tissues, while others exchanged knowing smiles. No one except Harold seemed to sense the undercurrent of tension rippling through the room. Even Emily, lost in the moment, failed to pick up on the subtle cues that her fiancé was not entirely at ease. Harold's mind raced as he weighed his options. Should he confront Daniel directly? Or should he wait until after the ceremony to investigate further? Interrupting the wedding would undoubtedly cause chaos, potentially embarrassing both Emily and Daniel, and possibly ruining what was supposed to be the happiest day of their lives. On the other hand, ignoring his instincts could lead to far worse consequences down the line. Deciding to tread carefully, Harold excused himself briefly, citing the need to retrieve additional paperwork from his office. It was a harmless enough excuse, one that wouldn't raise any eyebrows. As he stepped outside the chapel, the fresh air hit him like a wave, clearing his thoughts momentarily. He walked briskly toward the small building where he kept his records, his heart pounding in his chest. Once inside, he closed the door behind him and took a deep breath. Sitting down at his desk, Harold opened his laptop and began searching public databases for information on Daniel Harper. He typed in the name and cross-referenced it with the details on the marriage license. At first, nothing unusual popped up, but then as he dug deeper, discrepancies began to emerge. The address listed on the license didn't match any current property records. A quick search of social media profiles revealed inconsistencies in Daniel's backstory, and when Harold checked criminal databases, his blood ran cold. What he discovered sent a chill down his spine. Daniel Harper, or at least the man using that name, wasn't who he claimed to be. Articles from neighboring towns described a series of scams involving stolen identities. Victims recounted tales of charming strangers who swept them off their feet, gained their trust, and vanished without a trace, leaving behind shattered dreams and financial ruin. Each story bore striking similarities to what Harold was witnessing today. Armed with this newfound knowledge, Harold knew he had to act. But how? Returning to the chapel, he wrestled with the weight of his decision. Stopping the wedding would be a drastic measure, one that could devastate Emily and shock the entire community. Yet allowing the ceremony to proceed unchecked would mean turning a blind eye to potential danger. For Harold, the choice was clear. He had taken an oath to uphold justice and protect those who relied on him. And in this moment, Emily needed protecting more than ever. With resolve hardening in his chest, Harold prepared to step back into the chapel. He didn't know exactly how he would handle the situation, but one thing was certain. He couldn't let this wedding continue without addressing the truth. Whatever happened next, he vowed to do everything in his power to ensure that Emily and the entire town was safe from harm. Harold Whitaker sat in his small office, staring at the screen of his laptop as if it might suddenly change and prove him wrong. But the evidence was undeniable. The man standing at the altar, holding Emily Carter's hand and smiling warmly at her, wasn't Daniel Harper, or at least not the real Daniel Harper. What Harold had uncovered painted a chilling picture. a pattern of deception that stretched across multiple towns, leaving behind broken hearts and ruined lives. Each article he read confirmed his worst fears. This Daniel was a con artist, skilled at weaving lies and manipulating people into trusting him completely. And now, he had set his sights on Emily. As Harold scrolled through the details, his mind raced with questions. How long had this been going on? Had Daniel targeted Emily specifically? Or was she simply another victim in a long line of unsuspecting individuals? The thought made Harold's stomach churn. Emily, sweet and trusting Emily, didn't deserve to be caught up in such a web of deceit. She believed she was marrying the love of her life, a man who would stand by her through thick and thin. Instead, she was unknowingly walking into a nightmare. The clock on the wall ticked loudly, reminding Harold that time was slipping away. The guests were waiting patiently inside the chapel, unaware of the drama unfolding just a short distance away. Emily and Daniel likely assumed he'd return any moment to continue the ceremony. Every second Harold delayed meant more opportunity for Daniel to cement his hold over Emily and potentially escape without consequences. Yet rushing back without a plan could jeopardize everything. He needed to think carefully about how to handle this situation without causing unnecessary panic or harm. Taking a deep breath, Harold leaned back in his chair and closed his eyes for a brief moment. His hands trembled slightly as they rested on the desk, betraying the turmoil brewing within him. He had always prided himself on being level-headed, someone who approached every situation with calmness and clarity. But this was different. This wasn't just about following protocol or ensuring paperwork was in order. This was about protecting someone he cared about deeply, someone the entire town cherished. If he failed, the repercussions would ripple far beyond Emily herself. Opening his eyes, Harold stared at the stack of documents spread out before him. Among them was the marriage license Daniel had signed earlier. Picking it up again, Harold examined it closely, searching for anything else he might have missed. Sure enough, there it was. A faint smudge near the signature, almost imperceptible unless you knew what to look for. It looked like the kind of mark left by someone trying too hard to mimic someone else's handwriting, combined with the irregularities. In the driver's license and the alarming online records, it all pointed to one conclusion. Daniel Harper was an imposter. But why go to such lengths? Why target Emily specifically? Harold mulled over these questions, piecing together what little information he had. From what he'd read, scammers like Daniel often preyed on vulnerable individuals, those who were lonely, eager for companionship, or perhaps financially stable. Emily fit none of those categories perfectly. She was well-liked, independent, and financially secure on her own terms. Her only vulnerability, if it could even be called that, was her open heart. She trusted easily, believing the best in people until proven otherwise. That quality made her special, but it also made her susceptible to someone like Daniel. Suddenly, a memory surfaced in Harold's mind. A few weeks ago, he'd overheard Emily talking excitedly to Mrs. Thompson, the elderly woman who ran the local bakery. She'd mentioned how quickly Daniel had swept her off her feet after their first meeting. It was like fate, she'd said, giggling like a schoolgirl. We just clicked instantly. At the time, Harold hadn't thought much of it. Love stories often unfolded that way, especially in small towns where everyone knew each other's business. Now, though, the timeline seemed suspicious. Could Daniel have planned their encounter? Was their whirlwind romance nothing more than a calculated move to gain her trust? The more Harold thought about it, the angrier he became, not just at Daniel, but at himself for not noticing sooner. He should have trusted his instincts when he first saw the shaky signature on the marriage license. He should have asked more questions during their initial meeting instead of brushing off his doubts, but regret wouldn't help him now. All that mattered was stopping this wedding before it was too late. With renewed determination, Harold gathered his notes and documents, tucking them neatly into his folder. He couldn't confront Daniel directly, not yet. Doing so might provoke a reaction, giving the groom a chance to flee or manipulate the situation further. No, Harold needed to approach this strategically. He decided to return to the chapel and observe Daniel one last time, looking for any additional signs of guilt or hesitation. If necessary, he would find a way to discreetly signal for help, ensuring that authorities could intervene if things escalated. Walking back toward the chapel, Harold felt a strange mix of dread and resolve. The sun was still shining brightly, overhead, casting long shadows across the grassy fields surrounding the building. Birds chirped cheerfully in the trees, oblivious to the tension simmering below. Inside, the atmosphere remained celebratory. Guests chatted quietly among themselves and soft music played in the background. Emily and Daniel stood side by side, exchanging quiet smiles as they waited for Harold to resume the ceremony. When Harold re-entered the room, he did his best to appear composed, though his pulse quickened with every step he took. He approached the altar slowly, glancing at Daniel out of the corner of his eye. The groom's expression remained calm, though Harold noticed a slight twitch in his jaw, a telltale sign of nerves. For a fleeting moment their eyes met and Harold saw something flicker in Daniel's gaze. Suspicion, maybe even fear. It was subtle, but unmistakable. Clearing his throat, Harold addressed the congregation. "I apologize for the delay," he began, his voice steady despite the storm raging inside him. "Before we proceed, there are a few formalities I need to address." Turning to Daniel, he added, "Specifically, I'd like to confirm some details regarding your identification." A murmur rippled through the crowd and Emily turned to Daniel with a puzzled look. "Is everything okay?" she asked softly. "Of course," Daniel replied, forcing a smile. "Just a formality. I'm sure." Harold nodded but pressed on. "If you don't mind, sir, I'd like to review your documentation once more. It's important that everything is accurate before we move forward." For a split second, Daniel froze. Then, recovering quickly, he reached into his jacket pocket and retrieved the same driver's license he'd shown earlier. Handing it over, he chuckled lightly. "Here you go. Everything should be in order." Harold accepted the card, pretending to examine it carefully while subtly holding up the folder containing his findings. He wanted Daniel to see it, to know that he was onto him, but not enough to cause alarm among the guests. As expected, Daniel's demeanor shifted ever so slightly. His smile faltered, and his fingers twitched against the edge of the podium. To anyone else it might have looked like nervousness, but Harold recognized it for what it truly was: guilt. Deciding to push further, Harold flipped open his folder and pulled out a printed copy of one of the articles he'd found online. Without showing it to the guests, he held it up just enough for Daniel to see. "This looks familiar, doesn't it?" he asked casually, his tone deceptively light. Daniel's face paled, and for the first time, his confident facade cracked. What is that?" he stammered, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's quite interesting reading," Harold replied, his eyes locking onto Daniel's. "Would you care to explain?" The tension in the room grew palpable. Guests exchanged confused glances, sensing that something was amiss. Emily, still clinging to Daniel's arm, looked from one man to the other, her brow furrowing in concern. "What's going on?" she asked, her voice tinged with worry. Harold hesitated, torn between revealing the truth outright and maintaining control of the situation. Finally, he spoke, choosing his words carefully. "Emily, my dear, I believe there's something we need to discuss. Something very important." Daniel's composure shattered completely. In a flash, he stepped back, his hands raised defensively. "This is ridiculous," he snapped, his voice rising. "You're making a mistake." "No," Harold said firmly, his voice cutting through the growing chaos. "I think we both know the truth, and it's time you faced it." As the realization dawned on the guests, gasps erupted throughout the chapel. Emily's grip on Daniel's arm loosened, her expression shifting from confusion to horror. Whatever trust she'd placed in him was crumbling right before her eyes. And Daniel, realizing he'd been cornered, glanced desperately toward the door, calculating his next move. Harold knew he had succeeded in exposing the truth, but the hardest part was yet to come. The chapel, once filled with the soft hum of anticipation and joy, now buzzed with tension so thick it felt almost suffocating. Guests exchanged wide-eyed glances, their earlier excitement replaced by confusion and unease. Emily Carter stood, frozen, her hand still resting lightly on Daniel's arm. Though her grip had loosened considerably, her face was a mixture of disbelief and mounting dread, as if she were watching a dream crumble into dust before her eyes. Daniel, for his part, looked like a cornered animal, his confident demeanor completely shattered, replaced by panic that he couldn't quite mask. Harold Whitaker remained calm, his voice steady but firm as he addressed the room. "Emily," he said gently, turning to her, "there are some things we need to discuss. It's important that you hear them." His tone was kind but unyielding, leaving no room for argument. Emily blinked rapidly, her lips trembling as she struggled to process what was happening. She turned to Daniel, her eyes searching his face for answers, for reassurance, for anything that might make sense of the chaos unfolding around her. Daniel, however, was not in a position to offer explanations. His mind raced as he weighed his options, calculating how best to extricate himself from the situation. He forced a laugh, attempting to play off Harold's words as some sort of misunderstanding. "This is absurd," he said, his voice louder than necessary, tinged with desperation. "You're accusing me of something without any proof. This is insane." But Harold wasn't about to let him deflect or manipulate the moment. Without breaking eye contact, Harold held up the printed article he'd retrieved earlier, this time showing it to the entire congregation. The headline was stark: "Beware of imposter groom scams targeting small towns." Beneath it was a grainy photograph of a man who bore an uncanny resemblance to Daniel. The gasps that followed were immediate and sharp, rippling through the crowd like a wave. "This isn't a misunderstanding," Harold said, his voice cutting through the murmurs. "I've done my research and I'm afraid the evidence speaks for itself. You're not who you claim to be." Daniel's jaw tightened, and for a brief moment, he seemed to consider denying it further. But the weight of the truth, and the stares of dozens of people, was too much to bear. His shoulders slumped slightly and his bravado faltered. Still, he tried one last gambit. "Even if there's some mistake here," he said, his voice wavering, "does it really matter? We love each other, Emily. That's all that should count." Emily flinched at his words, stepping back instinctively. Her hands moved to cover her mouth as tears began to well in her eyes. For weeks, maybe even months, she had believed wholeheartedly in the life they were building together. Now, standing in front of everyone she cared about, she realized just how fragile that belief had been. Is it true?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Are you lying to me?" For a moment, silence hung heavily in the air. Daniel hesitated, torn between confessing and continuing to lie. And he chose neither. Instead, he glanced toward the door, his body coiled like a spring ready to snap. Before anyone could react, he bolted. The sudden movement sent shockwaves through the chapel. Gasps turned into shouts as Daniel pushed past startled guests, shoving chairs aside in his haste to escape. Harold stepped forward, raising his voice above the commotion. "Stop him," he called out urgently. "Don't let him leave." Two burly ushers, brothers named Tom and Jack Miller, sprang into action. They had been sitting near the back of the chapel, enjoying the ceremony alongside everyone else, but now they moved with surprising speed. As Daniel reached the doorway, they intercepted him, grabbing hold of his arms firmly. He struggled against them, twisting and pulling with surprising strength, but the Millers were stronger and more determined. "You can't do this," Daniel shouted, his voice laced with desperation. "You have no right." "We have every right," Harold replied, approaching steadily. "You've deceived this woman, stolen someone else's identity, and attempted to commit fraud under our very noses. The authorities will want to speak with you." The mention of the authorities seemed to drain the fight out of Daniel. His struggles slowed, and eventually he stopped resisting altogether. Defeated, he allowed the Millers to hold him in place while Harold retrieved his phone to call the police. The chapel fell silent once again, save for the sound of Emily's quiet sobs. Emily sank into a nearby chair, her hands covering her face as the weight of the betrayal crashed down on her. Friends and family rushed to her side, offering comfort and support, but nothing could fully ease the pain she felt. Through her tears, she managed to choke out a single question. Why? Harold knelt beside her, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. I don't know why he did it, he admitted softly. But I do know that you deserve better than this. You deserve honesty, trust, and love that's real, not fabricated lies designed to take advantage of you. As the reality of the situation settled over the room, the mood shifted from shock to anger. Several guests began voicing their outrage, demanding justice for Emily and condemning Daniel's actions. Others focused on consoling her, reminding her that she wasn't alone and that the town would stand by her no matter what. Meanwhile, Daniel stood silently, his head bowed in shame. Gone was the charming stranger who had swept Emily off her feet. In his place was a man exposed for who he truly was, a con artist willing to exploit others for personal gain. When the police arrived shortly thereafter, they took him into custody, without incident. Officers thanked Harold for his diligence and promised to investigate thoroughly, ensuring that Daniel faced consequences for his crimes. As the authorities led Daniel away, Emily watched from afar, her expression a mix of sorrow and relief. While the revelation had shattered her heart, she also felt a strange sense of liberation. For weeks she had ignored tiny doubts nagging at the edges of her mind, brushing them aside because she wanted so desperately to believe in the fairy tale Daniel had spun. Now those doubts had been validated, and though it hurt deeply, she knew she was better off knowing the truth. With the crisis contained, Harold returned his attention to the shaken guests. I understand this has been a difficult experience for everyone, he said, addressing the crowd. But I want to remind you all of something. Today may not have ended the way we hoped, but it has shown us the importance of vigilance, integrity, and community. We came together to celebrate love, and instead we uncovered deceit. But thanks to your support, Emily will get through this. And when she's ready, she'll find happiness again. Real happiness. His words resonated deeply, drawing nods of agreement from the attendees. Slowly, the atmosphere in the chapel began to shift once more, from despair to hope. People gathered around Emily, wrapping her in hugs and offering words of encouragement. Though the wedding had been derailed, the bonds of friendship and solidarity grew stronger than ever. As the sun dipped below the horizon outside, casting long shadows across the fields, the chapel emptied gradually. Guests lingered only briefly after the authorities departed, unwilling to leave Emily alone in her grief. Eventually, she found herself sitting quietly with Harold, who stayed behind to ensure she was okay. I never saw it coming, she confessed, her voice trembling. How could I have missed it? It's not your fault, Harold assured her. He was good at what he did, too good. Even the smartest, most cautious people can fall victim to someone like him. What matters now is that you're safe, and you'll heal. Emily nodded slowly, her tears finally beginning to subside. Though the road ahead would undoubtedly be challenging, she knew she wouldn't have to walk it alone. The town she loved, and the people who loved her in return, would see her through. And as Harold watched her take her first tentative steps toward healing, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. Justice, he realized, wasn't just about stopping wrongdoing. It was about protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. Today he had done exactly that. In the days that followed the dramatic events at the chapel, the small town buzzed with conversations about what had happened. Word spread quickly, as it always did in such tight-knit communities, and soon everyone, from the grocer to the librarian, to the schoolchildren, knew the story of how Emily Carter's wedding had been stopped just moments before it was finalized. While some whispered behind closed doors, others openly praised Harold Whitaker for his quick thinking and unwavering dedication to doing what was right. For Emily, however, the aftermath was a whirlwind of emotions: relief, anger, sadness, and Even gratitude all swirled together in an overwhelming tide. At first, Emily retreated from the world. She avoided answering phone calls, skipped her usual morning walks through town, and spent most of her time curled up on the couch under a blanket, staring blankly at the wall. The betrayal cut deeper than she could have imagined. It wasn't just that Daniel had lied to her. It was the realization that everything they'd shared, every moment she thought was real, had been part of an elaborate deception. The romantic dinners, the long talks about their future, the promises he'd made, all of it had been fabricated to serve his own agenda. Her friends and family weren't about to let her isolate herself for long. One by one, they showed up at her doorstep, bringing casseroles, fresh flowers, and heartfelt words of support. Mrs. Thompson, the elderly baker, arrived with a tray of her famous cinnamon rolls, insisting that a broken heart needs sugar to heal. Mr. Jenkins, who had once hired Daniel to fix his fence, apologized profusely for introducing him to Emily in the first place. Even her students sent handmade cards covered in glitter and crayon drawings, reminding her that she was loved and appreciated far beyond her role as a teacher. Their kindness didn't erase the pain, but it helped soften its edges. Slowly, Emily began to emerge from her shell. She started taking short walks around the neighborhood again, waving to neighbors, who greeted her warmly. When people asked how she was doing, she answered honestly, "I'm getting there." And she meant it. Healing wasn't going to happen overnight, but each day brought her closer to finding peace. Meanwhile, the authorities continued their investigation into Daniel Harper, or rather, the man posing as him. They uncovered a trail of deceit stretching back years, involving multiple aliases, stolen identities, and countless victims across several states. Many of these individuals reached out to Emily after hearing about her ordeal, sharing their own stories of heartbreak and loss. Some had lost money. Others had lost trust in love entirely. Hearing from them gave Emily a strange sense of solidarity. She realized she wasn't alone in this experience, and that knowledge somehow made the burden easier to bear. The news coverage of the incident brought attention not only to Daniel's crimes but also to Harold's heroic actions. Reporters flocked to the town, eager to interview the justice of the peace who had single-handedly prevented a scammer from ruining another life. Harold, ever humble, downplayed his role, insisting that anyone in his position would have done the same. But the townsfolk knew better. They celebrated him as a local hero, someone who had gone above and beyond to protect one of their own. At the next town meeting, Mayor Harris presented Harold with a plaque recognizing his service, much to his embarrassment. For Emily, the public spotlight was harder to navigate. While she appreciated the outpouring of support, she struggled with feelings of vulnerability. Seeing her name in newspapers or hearing strangers discuss her personal life felt invasive, like salt being rubbed into an open wound. To cope, she leaned heavily on her closest confidants, particularly Harold, who became something of a mentor during this difficult time. He encouraged her to focus on the positives, that she had escaped a potentially devastating situation and that she still had a bright future ahead of her. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, Emily joined Harold for a quiet walk along the riverbank. The air was cool and crisp, carrying the faint scent of blooming wildflowers. For a while, neither of them spoke, content simply to enjoy the serenity of the moment. Finally, Emily broke the silence. "I keep wondering if I'll ever trust anyone again," she admitted, her voice soft but steady. "How do you move past something like this?" Harold paused, considering his response carefully. "Trust is like glass," he said after a moment. "Once it shatters, it takes time to piece it back together. But when it does, it becomes stronger than before. You've seen the worst of humanity now, Emily. But don't let that blind you to the best. There are good people in this world. People who will love you truly and deeply, without ulterior motives." His words resonated with her, planting a seed of hope in her heart. Over the following weeks, Emily threw herself into her work, finding solace in the laughter and curiosity of her students. Teaching had always been her passion, and returning to the classroom reminded her of why she loved it so much. She also reconnected with old hobbies she'd neglected during her whirlwind romance with Daniel, painting landscapes, tending to her garden, and volunteering at the local animal shelter. These activities gave her a renewed sense of purpose and reminded her that joy could still be found, even after heartbreak. As months passed, the memory of Daniel faded into the background. He was sentenced to prison for his crimes, and while Emily occasionally thought about him, those thoughts no longer consumed her. Instead, she focused on building a new chapter of her life, one defined by resilience and self-discovery. Her friends joked that she seemed more confident than ever, as though surviving such a harrowing experience had awakened a hidden strength within her. The town, too, emerged from the ordeal stronger than before. Conversations about safety and vigilance became more common, with residents vowing to look out for one another. Harold continued officiating weddings, though he admitted to being slightly more thorough in his pre-ceremony checks. His actions served as a reminder that sometimes trusting your instincts can make all the difference. Eventually, Emily found herself smiling genuinely again, not because she had forgotten what happened, but because she had learned to rise above it. She began attending community events, joining book clubs, and participating in charity fundraisers. Each step forward felt like reclaiming a piece of herself, proving that while Daniel may have tried to define her story, he hadn't succeeded. 1. Crisp autumn afternoon, as golden leaves danced in the breeze, Emily stood on the steps of the chapel where her wedding had almost taken place. The building looked different now, less like a symbol of shattered dreams and more like a testament to survival. She took a deep breath, feeling a sense of closure wash over her. Whatever the future held, she knew she was ready to face it head-on, and somewhere in the distance, Harold watched her from his porch, a proud smile spreading across his face. Justice had been served, wounds were healing, and life in the small town carried on, a little wiser, a little kinder, and infinitely more hopeful.